Alright, here we are moving on to sidebars. 2x6 is preferred, but wood is insane right now, so we are using 2x4s, which are still insane, just slightly less insane. On that note, so I mean the lumber is so expensive, I think it's going to cost me like 90 cents a piece to manufacture these. So right now it's actually not really even worth making them. But I already made my process, and I'm not backtracking. When lumber prices were what they were before, it cost me about 15 cents a piece. So hopefully someday we'll get back to that. Unfortunately, it'll never get back to 15 cents, you know, because the prices will never drop back to what they were before. They'll probably end up being 20 or 30 cents, but we'll still make it worth it. So, step 1, chop saw. Set up stop block with sawdust relief at 6 1/4 inches for your medium frames, or 9 1/8 inches for your deep frames. We are going to making all deep frames today. Make a test cut. Look at that 2x4. It is a nice quality 2x4. And adjust as needed. Okay, here we are at the table saw for step 2. Our setup is a 3/4 inch dado blade at 7/16 height. Set the fence so that the dado is centered on the 2x6 and or 2x4. Make a test cut, rip the top on the end grain side, adjust as needed, and make all rips keeping pieces perpendicular to the table and as tight to the fence as possible. So we're all set up. We made our test cut and we are good to go. Now, one thing I want to mention, we're taking a lot of material out in one pass. So there's resistance, right? But just because the blade is going fast does not mean you have to. Let the blade do the work. Don't mess up your cut just because it takes time. Look at the material you're taking out, it takes time. Additionally, you see the blowout in the back. You're going to get that on every single cut. Every one. So what is important to do is when you make this cut, you get your blowout on the back. When we get to the next step, it is important to go in the same direction and have the blowout in the same side. So when we do these, when you're stacking them, this should be a habit anyways for every cut, right? When you're stacking things, you want everything exactly the same way. But all your blowouts need to be on one side, so that way when you're doing the next step, you don't have to, you know, pick up the piece and look at it, you know, right? If they're all this way, all the blowouts are there, right? So I can just pick up my piece, put it like this. Pick up my next piece, put it like that. And we don't care about that blowout, because when we're ripping these down to 3/8 lengths, we're going to start on this side. Now I don't cut my last rounded piece off. It's just an extra step. And the thing is, if you get quality 2x4s, the square part that's necessary is inside where your dado cut is. So I'll have a 3/8 inch piece, and you know, some of my frames are going to have a little bit of round spot right there, which matters zero. Does not matter at all. If you, I mean, you could rip that off if you want and then get all square ones, but you're just adding another step. You're going to have to rip every single damn 2x4 just to have some of your frames not have a little bit of roundness to them. Doesn't seem to make sense to me, so I don't do it. And that's it for this step. Okay, so with your sidebars, you generate more sawdust than on any other piece. To help mitigate that with the table saw is I just open up my the side of the saw so the sawdust has somewhere to evacuate to. I need a dust collector. I don't have one. I need one. I mean, there's 1.5 feet of sawdust underneath this table saw. It's slightly ridiculous. But anyways, here we go. Here we are on step 3. Still on the table saw. Install a 9/16 inch dado blade at 1/2 inch height. Set the fence so the dado is centered on the 2x6. Make test cut rip bottom end grain side just as needed. Make all rips, keeping pieces perpendicular to table and tight to fence as possible. Ensure the blowout side is on the same side as the top blowout. It's the most important. Well, actually, there's a lot of important, but that's important too. So here we are. I got rid of my feather board because it was actually the first time I've used it on this step. That's why it's not in the process, and it was unnecessary. It was actually more of a hindrance because it just makes it so I can't see my workpiece as well. So we got rid of that. So we're all set. We have our stack so that we can look at it without thinking, grab it, and move it over and have our blowout facing the back. And so here we go. Okay, here we are on our next step, which is not number 4. Because number 4 before was to get a ripping blade and rip off the blowout side. And we have adjusted that because it's no longer necessary because of the way we rip our pieces down. So instead we are at step 5. 3/4 inch spindle, trim blade, spacer, 3/8 spacer, trim blade, spacer, 3/8 spacer, trim blade, etc., etc. Raise the spindle till the bottom blade is 3/8 above the table. Set the fence so the blades cut full depth of a 2x6, but ensure that the 2x6 does not ride on or touch the spacers when making the cuts. Now here's the thing. Those spacers were too big for these blades, so you measured from the outside of the spacer to the outside of the blade. It was exactly 1.5 inches. So 2x4s are not necessarily exactly 1.5 inches, and even if they were, if you adjusted it right on the outside, it's just, you know, it would rub the spacers, it would bog down the shaper, popped a couple of breakers. So I had a buddy bring it to his machine shop and turn the spacers down a little bit. So now I have clearance. Let's see. So I got 2x4s because the 2x6s were so expensive. Now here's the thing. At first I was going to do this all out of 2x4s. But then I did the math and I figured I could do one less blade, and with a 2x6 it works out very well to where it's 2 passes and it's not a lot of waste. I think your second pass you lose like 1 piece here. But with a 2x4 it's like that, and essentially this big piece that you get cut, you have to cut it one more time, and it's a whole nother pass, and you only get one more sidebar. So it's a huge waste of time with the 2x4s. I may actually keep the 2x4s because I have room here, and just get one more spacer. Oh, but then you'd have to turn that down. We'll figure that out. That's for me to think about. I'll do 2x6s. That's what I'll do. Anyway, so here we are. We're on our next step. We're going to test them out. Look at this. No, really. Verify 2x6s are not touching the spacers. See, because that's really important because it bogs this down. So here we go. Here we are on our last step for the sidebars. So the shaper with a 3/4 inch spindle installed from bottom to top. It's a 3/4 inch spacer followed by a 2.5 inch rabbet cutter. So we have that installed. Raise the spindle till the cutter is just above the plywood base of the jig, but ensure that the bottom is below the bottom of the sidebars. Install 5 sidebars per slot. Bottom slot is loose, so install from bottom groove first, then drop the top into place. Running the plywood base lightly against the bottom 3/4 inch spacer, make the cuts. Because the bottom sidebars are loose, slightly loose, make sure to apply sufficient downward pressure when cutter is taking material from bottom of sidebars. If not, the sidebars will want to jump around in the cutter as the cutter bites into them. You get a little bit of chatter if you don't push down on this jig. Which is fine, just push down on it. So here's the jig. Alright, so we have our top and handle red on red. I made it so the sidebars are elevated above where they rest in, so your downward pressure compresses your sidebars. Here's the shape of the frame on the outside of the sidebar. So the way that this works is you run this into that spacer, and as this contacts the spacer, it will give you the appropriate shape for your sidebars. So you go from 1.5 inch 2x4 to the proper size frame. And what's kind of nice about that is, let's say you messed up getting this in the center. Even if it's a little bit off, as long as it's not so much that your cutter won't cut into one side, this will fix that error. It can be, you know, a 1/16 this way. It could probably even be 1/8 of an inch to the right. In the cutter, you know, it'll fix it. So that is the next and last step for our sidebars. end bars. Side bars. Now I haven't made it yet, but I will be making a 4-drill jig so that you can drill them. But I just haven't made it yet.